3 C2 cyber incidents in 90 days. New Zealand had not recorded an incident at this severity for nearly 5 years. 5 years of silence, then 3 in 1 quarter. The one case the regulator examined was not sophisticated. Stolen credentials, optional multi-factor authentication, and a warning left unaddressed for 34 days. Is your board's third-party governance tighter than that? Let's get into it. In May 2021, a ransomware attack paralyzed 5 hospitals for more than 3 months. That was the benchmark against which C2, the second highest severity classification, was last understood in this country. This is the Hamberger Report. I am Andreas Hamberger, Enterprise Architect and AI Governance Practitioner, Wellington. A lone figure viewed from behind faces a dark wall on which a single severity marker glows. That is the image this episode earns. On the 22nd of June 2026, the National Cybersecurity Center published its Q1 2026 Cybersecurity Insights Report. Buried inside the quarterly numbers was a finding that should hold the attention of every New Zealand board: the return of C2 highly significant cyber incidents, not 1, 3, in a single quarter. The last time New Zealand recorded an incident at this severity was the 2021-22 financial year. For nearly 5 years, the count at this level was 0. A view. The National Cybersecurity Center does not use the C2 label loosely. Its severity scale runs from C1, a national cyber emergency, down to C6 at the routine end. C2 sits second from the top. It is reserved for incidents that expose key sensitive data or disrupt essential services at organizations of national significance. The kind of event that takes substantial time and resources to address and that reaches thousands of New Zealanders beyond the victim organization itself. 3 of those in 90 days is not noise. It is a signal. Today we read it. The National Cybersecurity Center scale runs from C1, a national cyber emergency, down to C6. C2 sits second from the top. Incidents that expose key sensitive data or disrupt essential services at organizations of national significance, taking substantial time to resolve, reaching thousands of New Zealanders beyond the victim. A horizontal timeline showing 2 highly significant incidents in 2021-22, 5 years of silence, and then 3 incidents clustered in the first quarter of 2026. That is the structural picture. 2021 and 22, 2 C2 incidents, both National Health Service events. The first was the Waikato District Health Board ransomware attack of May 2021. It paralyzed services at 5 hospitals, brought down 611 servers, forced manual workarounds for more than 3 months, and ended with private data from more than 4,000 patients and employees published on the dark web. A later review found the board was up to date with patching. Software vulnerabilities did not play a role. The first quarter of 2026 has already recorded 3 more in 90 days than in any full financial year since the Waikato attack. 2 of those 3 remain unnamed. The National Cybersecurity Center does not identify affected organizations. The total is confirmed. 2 agencies looked at the same events for different reasons: the Center for Incident Response and Advisory, the Commissioner for Financial Accountability under the Privacy Act. Their lanes are separate and complementary. Before we go further, a note on what is coming to this channel. The Lethal by Design series runs on Fridays right now. The accountability gap in modern military AI and autonomous weapon systems, drawn directly from the book. New episodes every Friday. The series is in the description. A data infographic showing total quarterly losses of 5.6 million New Zealand dollars, and that 42 incidents drove 97% of all money lost. That proportion is the governance lesson. Across Q1 2026, the National Cybersecurity Center handled 1,164 cyber incidents, slightly more than the previous quarter. Of those, 77 required specialist technical support, down 14%. Phishing and credential harvesting was the largest single category by volume at 437 incidents. Scams and fraud were second by volume and accounted for most of the loss. Direct losses reached 5.6 million New Zealand dollars, a 76% rise on the previous quarter. Individuals bore about 5.2 million. Organizational losses came to roughly 340,000. The concentration, 42 incidents with losses of $10,000 or more, accounted for 97% of all money lost. The remaining incidents with a financial figure contributed 3% between them. One attribution figure deserves careful reading. Of the 77 incidents that received specialist triage, the National Cybersecurity Center assessed 17% as state-sponsored, 52% as ordinary cybercrime, and the remainder is not attributable. That 17% is 17% of the nationally significant subset, not of all 1,164 incidents. Precision here is a governance discipline, not pedantry. The publicly known C2 incident is the December 2025 ransomware breach of ManageMyHealth. The Privacy Commissioner's Phase 1 inquiry, released on the 27th of May 2026, found both ManageMyHealth and Health New Zealand had breached Rule 5 of the Health Information Privacy Code. The Commissioner's central finding: this security breach was not the result of a single failure. It involved a combination of factors. That sentence is architectural debt described in the language of a regulator. The breach was characterized as neither technically sophisticated nor particularly uncommon. A threat actor used stolen credentials to reach a health documents module. The data of 99,416 patients was accessed and taken, yet it cleared the C2 threshold because the sensitivity of the data, the scale of the affected population, and the national significance of the organizations put it there. Look at the combination the Commissioner named on the ManageMyHealth side: multi-factor authentication available but optional, ineffective web security controls, identity and access management. Weak enough that one set of stolen credentials reached thousands of other accounts. Access control and application security risks raised in earlier testing and not adequately addressed. Insufficient data leak protection settings. And a detection failure so complete that ManageMyHealth learned of the breach only when Health New Zealand alerted it, not from its own monitoring. No single item on that list, fixed on its own, would necessarily have stopped the attack. All of them together created a posture that could not detect or contain a credential-based intrusion. Health New Zealand's failures are a separate category. Boards should not skip them. Health New Zealand did not build the platform. It bore governance responsibility for patients' data handled by a third party. The Commissioner found that responsibility was not met across 5 documented dimensions. Health New Zealand's failures sit in the third-party governance category. The Commissioner found insufficient due diligence before engagement, poor quality privacy risk assessments, an inadequate understanding of how the system was technically managed, over-reliance on the vendor's own security assurances rather than independent verification, a project steering group with no direct privacy or security representation, and contracts that lacked appropriate protections. Then there is the accountability question. On the 17th of November 2025, 34 days before the attack, the Health Ministry passed ManageMyHealth a formal warning about application programming interface vulnerabilities, identified by an independent researcher, noting the similarities were enough to have raised serious concerns about attack potential. The Commissioner found no evidence the vulnerabilities were adequately addressed before the 21st of December. Now the sovereign dimension, allied governments treat health data and health system continuity as critical national infrastructure. The European Union's Network and Information Security Directive, known as NIS2, places hospitals inside its highest duty tier. The United States Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency lists healthcare among its 16 critical infrastructure sectors. New Zealand's own critical infrastructure framework is still in consultation. The deeper point is one of sovereign defensive capacity. When frontier artificial intelligence compresses the time between a vulnerability being discovered and being exploited, as the National Cybersecurity Center warned 4 days before this report, a small nation's ability to defend data of national significance becomes a sovereignty question, not only a procurement one. The institutions that defend the data and the institutions that own it are not always the same, and that gap is where accountability is decided. The New Zealand cybersecurity strategy puts the annual cost of cybercrime at more than $1.6 billion. 59% of large businesses reported a cyber incident in the past year. A proposed critical infrastructure framework would mandate reporting timelines and penalties across 7 sectors, including health. The New Zealand cybersecurity strategy 2026 to 2030 sets the policy backdrop. The government puts the annual cost of cybercrime at more than $1.6 billion, predominantly cyber-enabled fraud. This is the government's own published estimate. In the 2024 to 25 year, the National Cybersecurity Center disrupted 473.4 million malicious cyber events against 10.3 million the year before. That jump reflects better detection, not a 46-fold rise in attacks. What it establishes is the scale of attempted activity beneath the visible incident count. The strategy's proposed critical infrastructure framework would, if enacted, apply minimum standards, mandatory incident reporting on 24-hour and 72-hour timelines, and financial penalties across 7 sectors, including health. These obligations are proposed. Consultation closed in April 2026. None is enacted law as at the time of writing. 4 days before the quarterly report, on the 18th of June 2026, the National Cybersecurity Center published a separate advisory on frontier artificial intelligence. Core warning: AI reduces the time between a vulnerability being discovered and being exploited. Frontier models can find flaws in software at scale. The recommended response: disciplined vulnerability management, defense in depth, an assumed compromise posture, fewer internet-exposed systems, and supply chain management. The 34-day window ManageMyHealth had between warning and breach is exactly the kind of window that is closing. None of this requires a board to become a security operations center. It requires a short list of questions as standing governance. Ask whether multi-factor authentication is mandatory on every system touching sensitive data. Optional was the most quoted failure in the ManageMyHealth inquiry. A cinematic scene showing a narrowing gap of light between 2 converging dark surfaces. A small figure stepping through while there is still room. That is the choice a board makes at every governance review. None of this requires a board to become a security operations center. It requires a short list of questions treated as standing governance. Ask whether multi-factor authentication is mandatory, not merely available on every system that touches sensitive data. Optional was the single most quoted failure in the ManageMyHealth inquiry. Ask who holds full access to your networks and whether that list has been reviewed this quarter. Ask how you would learn of a breach from your own monitoring or from a partner's phone call, as ManageMyHealth did 9 days after the fact. Ask for every third party that holds your data whether you accepted a self-assessment or required independent verification, and whether your contract obliges that vendor to protect the information, and ask whether the people in the room when those decisions are made include anyone whose job is privacy or security. The ManageMyHealth steering group had no such voice. Every gap the commissioner named was addressable before the breach. The 42 costly incidents that drove 97% of the quarter's losses are exactly the ones that disciplined governance is built to catch. When your board last reviewed a vendor that holds your most sensitive data, did you accept their assurance or did you ask for independent proof? What did that choice cost or save you when it mattered?
That is the Hamberger Report for today. If this was useful, subscribe and hit the like button. It helps more professionals find the channel. You will find links to everything we covered in the description below. I am Andreas Hamberger, and I will see you tomorrow.
Like and subscribe.